Attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this discussion on building a circular and climate neutral economy, and to hear from a range of very interesting stakeholders and policymakers on their reaction and thinking about the November Circular Economy Package. My name is Martin Porter. I'm Executive Chair of CISL in Brussels, and it's my pleasure to moderate this discussion and guide us through the next hour and a half, which I hope you will all find extremely interesting, not least because we have an excellent lineup of speakers and participants, and indeed a very wide range of people participating in the audience. If we can go to the next slide, and I will briefly run through the agenda. You can see from this that we have an excellent lineup of speakers from all of the major EU institutions, and then obviously also from different businesses and other stakeholder perspectives. So I hope that we will both cover all of the relevant and most pertinent and interesting dimensions of this discussion. And my job will also be to ensure that where we have questions from yourselves, that we're able to put those to some of the participants. And with my colleagues, I will do my best to make sure that through the chat, any questions that come up, we try and answer those. And where we can't, obviously, we will do our best to ensure we can come back to you and give you responses after the discussion. So with that, my thanks, obviously, to all of the speakers and participants for joining. And just by way of brief context and background, let me just refresh our minds on the topic, but also give you a little bit of background on ourselves and the organization that we are. So CLG Europe's Materials and Products Task Force was launched in 2021, as you can see, at COP26, and brings together a leading group of businesses from a range of business sectors, all of whom are committed to driving forward this agenda and giving input and experience to policymakers and others on how best to do that. They are obviously committed to doing this on a Europe-wide basis and are collaborating with the support of CISL and indeed in the context also of the Corporate Leaders Group Europe, the wider group of companies who are committed to doing as much as they can on the climate agenda in a similar way. So this task force has been active now since 2021 and has been working to support this agenda and has produced a number of reports and materials in advance of key events, notably obviously at the last COP and in the last year has produced reports such as that on the digital product passport, materials which hopefully you have either seen already or which we can provide you afterwards. The aim of this group is obviously to engage with policymakers, and this is an event which brings some of them together with those policymakers and other stakeholders, as you see from the agenda, and to have a public discussion about the proposals that are on the table already, and to see how best to put them into practice. So with that as introduction, I'm delighted to say that we have, as a first piece of our meeting today, a word video presentation from Commissioner Sinkevičius, apologies for my pronunciation, and I would like to ask my colleagues if we can play that before we get into our discussion. So hopefully the technology will now enable us to see that video. Very good. So thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. I think that sets the scene extremely well for our discussion here today, and obviously enables us to think about all of the issues that were mentioned. And we can immediately now, I think, look at the follow-up work and the discussions that are necessary, as the Commissioner indicated, with three people who are actually handling this on a day-to-day basis at the very heart of each of the main EU institutions. So I'm very happy that I have with me now, I hope we'll soon see them on video, the head of unit dealing with waste and resources in the European Commission, Mattia Pellegrini. I hope that we will also see Sirpa Pietikäinen, or at least hear from her. I understand that she may not have the video, but Sirpa, also welcome to you, as well as Mattia. And Marta, Marta Lima Basto from the Ministry of Economic and Maritime Affairs in Portugal. So Marta, welcome to you. It's great to have you all here with us, and indeed from each, as I said, of the three main institutions, you have a different perspective on this. And we will begin by hearing from Mattia, who is working very closely, obviously, with the Commissioner in delivering on that agenda. So Mattia, he's already said a number of things about your work and your agenda, but please follow up and give us more details and set out what you're now working on and looking for, indeed, from the stakeholders who are involved in this discussion here with you today. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. Indeed, I mean, we are working at the moment on many legislation, and all this legislation are around circular economy and the contribution, indeed, that circular economy can also give to climate change. Because indeed, one of the ways to decarbonize is actually to make sure that products are not done in a linear way, but rather in a circular way, because I mean, when you look at then CO2 emissions, there are clear benefits. As you know, that type of logic of designing circular products started with the batteries regulation, which was the first time that the Commission has actually regulated the entire life cycle of a product, of a very important product, that indeed, if it's not circular, I mean, we're talking about the use of batteries in order to decarbonize, but indeed, if they're not designed in a circular way, then you may really have negative impacts on the production stage of the battery. So that's the reason why the Commission has set out a number of sustainability requirements. By the way, also carbon threshold in the batteries regulation. And that was the first one done in December 2020, which now, after 2 years of intense negotiation, has come to an agreement by the co-legislator, and should be published in the coming months, at the latest before the summer break. I mean, now it's a matter of correcting the text. And then after that, the Commission has come up, as you know, with the first circular economy package, and which was in particular about the sustainable product regulation. So really, how we design products in a sustainable way. By the way, you were mentioning, Martin, that you have done work on the digital product passport. As you know, this is also one of the components both of the batteries regulation and of the sustainable product regulation. You have a batteries passport foreseen in the batteries regulation and a product passport foreseen in the sustainable product regulation, which is a transformation of the old eco-design legislation into a type of legislation which takes into account not only energy efficiency, but the full sustainability of a product. And more recently, indeed, which was, I think, is the main topic of today's discussion, we came out with the second circular economy package, where we are focused on packaging waste. And indeed, this has been really a transformative approach, because indeed, not only because, again, we have, by the way, what you have noticed probably is that constantly we have reviewed what they were existing directive and transformed them into regulation. It's a very important point, because that means that when we're talking about sustainability requirements, they will apply directly to economic operators. So that is the big change also with this approach of regulation, and indeed it will be really, important that companies then comply with these sustainability requirements. But I think in packaging we have taken even an additional step, which was, and I think the Commission referred to that, is that for the first time we have regulated what are called the 2 higher level of the waste hierarchy. So the prevention of waste from packaging, and also the reuse. So as you have seen, we have set out for the first time a mandatory reuse targets for certain sectors, but that is also a big novelty compared to really the approach until now. And of course, then we have also mandated important things like recyclability of packaging by 2030. So there will be a system by which if the packaging does not comply with a certain performance class, then will be out of the market in 2030. So that's at the moment, just to give you an idea, 1/3 of the packaging is considered, according to different studies, is considered to be designed in a way which cannot be recycled at the end of the process. So with that measure, we will fix that problem. And also then there is a problem of non-performance of a specific one sector, which is the plastic sector in terms of packaging, in the sense that recycling rates are very low. So in order to boost the recycling rates only for plastic packaging, the Commission has put forward mandatory recycled content. It's an increased level, but indeed, and as you have seen, we have divided in 2 types of packaging: the packaging which is in contact with food or sensitive in general, and the packaging, of course, which is non-sensitive. And of course, for the non-sensitive packaging, you can have much higher targets in terms of recycled content. And also what is important, maybe as a final point, we have a lot of measures about labeling, because indeed also labels can, again, if we want to improve a recycling operation, a reuse operation, you need labels which can guide the consumer. So there will be at least 3 sort of labels: one on sorting instructions, one on reuse, and one on recycled content. So that they will allow and they will guide the consumer. So for example, when you sort at home, the idea is that you will have the same pictograms in the receptacles, so in your bin or bags, and the same pictogram in the packaging. So you will not make any mistakes, and because as you know, especially for complex packaging, sometimes you wonder yourself as a consumer, which bin should I put it? So that will increase both the collection rate and the purity level, because there is also an issue of purity, of contamination. So that's, again, will lead to higher recycling rates. Higher recycling rates means less primary raw materials, and that means less CO2 impacts. By the way, the last point I wanted to make, if you look at our impact assessment, especially on recycled content for plastics, as you know, plastic is made out of petrol. So we have estimated with our targets on recycled content for plastics, how much imports of fuel can be, of petrol, can be avoided. So that's not only you have a CO2 positive impacts, but also in the current context of energy dependency and diversification of sources and more strategic autonomy, will also bring that element in relation to the imports of oil, which are needed for the production of primary plastics. There is many other things in the proposal. It's a very big one, but I think I don't want to take it too long. But of course, if there are any questions or reactions, then I'm happy to take it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mattia. Well, your last point, let me sort of follow up and reiterate that for those of you who are in our audience, please feel free to use the chat function in order to put questions, and we will do our best to collate those and put them to Mattia, to Marta, to Sirpa at the end of their initial contributions. And as I said, if we don't get a chance to do that now, we'll do it afterwards as best we can. There's a huge amount that we can get into there, Mattia, and I guess the best way of starting that is to maybe turn to Sirpa and to see what her initial reaction and maybe what she anticipates and is the reaction of the European Parliament more broadly on this agenda. So Sirpa, welcome. I hope you can hear me, and it's always a pleasure to have you with us. So if you can hear me, the floor is now yours.
Thank you.
You can't.
Thank you very
much. Sirpa, welcome.
and I hope that you can hear me as well. Always a pleasure to work with you, Martin, and very happy to be here in this session. Okay, about these reactions, I think that there's a lot of good and actually this kind of a paradigm changing in this proposed regulation. One is, of course, this hierarchy that was first time put in place in batteries, as we heard from Mattia, but also now it is extended. It's the extended producer liability that puts the reusability at the first place. And of course, this is something that has raised worries and reactions already, so the parliament needs to be very tough on this. Then when it comes to choose when to reuse and whether there should be a compulsory recycled content or not, what I'm actually looking forward very much, and that is under the environment, DG environment also, is the indicator settings. And that would need to be the whole life cycle analysis so that we can actually see where and how the reuse can be extended, how to prefer certain materials. Plastics are good in some places, wood in some places, then maybe even glass as a container if you can create a longer term and metals longer term uses. But to really get the sort of sort of materials right, this is what is needed, and hopefully this kind of a BEF LCA could be clear and could be fortified in the parliament. Then what I'm lacking here and what I'm missing is the whole target, and this is not to blame the commissioner, because I know how hard this discussion is both in the parliament and not to talk about the council and the commission itself. But what we really would need to have is this kind of a complete indicator set plus then not only indicative but the science-based targets on a reduction of the resource use. As we all know, we are talking about tenfold improvement in resource efficiency. And what I'm very afraid, be it backing or other sectors, is that we take the sidetracks and end up in some solutions that are better than, but not effective and actually not helpful of getting to higher targets, but preventive on that. And I could have a long list of examples, both in backing and in other areas, what that can mean. But to avoid this, I think that this ambition level should be clearly stated out and it should be binding. Then about the whole measuring system is still, as I mentioned, lacking behind, and that has, of course, the connections with other regulations like taxonomy, sustainable finance in general, about our budgets, and about then, of course, Eurostat and how we measure the resource efficiency in our member states. Then about measuring, and this is quite clearly in the Waste Framework Directive, but also here, I think that we clearly should have 4 points of measurements to really get the information about how effective the system is. And that was very unfortunate that the last time when we had the Waste Framework Directive in the Parliament, we were not able to do that. First, you would need to, of course, measure the collected materials. Then second point, you should measure the amount that goes to reuse and Then on the other hand, on recycling facilities, then you would need to get the measurement what comes out of the recycling facilities. And there, as I've learned, there's quite a lot of loss nowadays. So the actually recycling processes are not effective, and we should go there on the root causes, and quite often that is materials and the collection systems that cause the problems. And the fourth point should be then actually what is on real use when after the material is reprocessed. For example, in Finnish case, we do collect plastics pretty well. We do reprocess it pretty well, but actually what gets out, only about half is used and the rest is incinerated. And we actually shouldn't and couldn't tolerate that kind of a lapse. And about the effective reuse of the plastic, so that means in real packing is close to 4% in Europe at the moment, not to be on the 50%. Then to pick up a couple of words of warning also, what I hope that both a waste regulation and here could be clarified is the chemical recycling. It should be last resort, and I'm very happy that the reuse is preferred and mechanical recycling thereafter. But as we know, there's really ineffective, close to fossil fuel industry, basically turning the majority of the material to be a fuel or to be incinerated, and this should not be categorized or understood as chemical recycling. It should be something that we yet does not exist, but we know that the systems are on the pipeline already. So that means that the regain of the molecules, the plastic molecules, are above 70. So it is really effective and really clean and reusable. And that then would sort of set this bar and the stage right for the future. Then again, word of warning about biomaterials are not always better, and this is in single use something I sort of rest my case, because without this kind of a proper PEF LCA, one can't tell is it better to have single-use plastics or reusable metal forks and knives in fast food systems, or wooden utilities on use. And there I'm afraid we are just sort of lobbying a bit like in buildings to prefer one or the other route over the others, and that might not always be the case. If you cut the forests in China to produce forks and knives no one basically uses because they are packed on the back of 3, and quite often you need only fork or you need only spoon if that is a reasonable use of the resources. So there's a lot of stuff left on detail to look close. To conclude, I'm just wishing and hoping that the Commission could still come up with the waste more clearer, and then the as above mentioned targets and the measurement and the science-based approach on here to give the regulation as a last remaining gift to the Parliament out of this very good work this Commission has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sirpa, very much. I think that's a great set of points that you raise, and obviously I hope I'll come back to Mattia certainly with some of those, ranging from the importance of measurement and metrics, which goes to the heart of this, obviously alignment with other policies and regulation, some specific points, for example, about chemical recycling, which we might turn to, and the link at the end, maybe to even broader issues like trade, and I dare say even in industry strategy and plans, given what is going to be published today by the European Commission, indeed. With that, and I don't want to preempt, obviously, what Marta is going to say. Marta, welcome, and look forward to hearing what your perspective is on this, obviously working at a national level, but in the context of the European Union as a whole and the Council work that you're engaged in. So look forward to hearing from you, and then we'll come back to some questions. I've got some online as well, which I'll turn to, but Marta, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Let me start by greeting the other participants in this event and thanking the CLG Europe Task Force on Climate Neutral and Circular Materials and Products for hosting the event and inviting the Directorate General for Economic Activities from Portugal. For the sake of clarity, let me tell you that this Directorate General is a public organization within the Ministry of Economy and Maritime Affairs, and we are involved, among many other competencies, in the formulation of public policies within the framework of circular economy, particularly with regard to waste management and extended producer responsibility. But we do this, obviously, in coordination with the Ministry of Environment, who has the lead of many of these negotiations within the European Council. We all have in mind that circular economy is an approach that aims to keep resources in a productive circuit for longer, and consequently including measures and actions that extend the lifetime of materials to the limit if possible and enhancing their value. The transition, it's not easy from a linear economy to a circular model. It involves more than simply recycling. We do it as much as possible, but there are other areas where we can act on. The eco-design of products, including the phasing out and the elimination of hazardous substances, and we are negotiating that in the European Council, as it was already said by the Commission. We have strategies to promote reuse, remanufacturing, and repair of products, restrictions on the single use of products, combating premature obsolescence, and limiting the destruction of unsold durable goods. Also, strategies that stimulate new consumption patterns, and we cannot left out the empowering consumers by providing reliable information to enable them to make the smart choice or the sustainable choice when each and every one of us goes shopping. So this second European Circular Economy Action Plan and the proposals that are within it focus actions on those resource-intensive sectors where the potential for circularity is higher. Without any doubt, both the packaging and plastic sectors are two of these such cases. And I'll be focusing on the packaging and packaging waste. We are obviously committed to contribute for the minimization of unnecessary packaging on the market to ensure that consumers can opt for usable packaging, as well as to work on labels with clear information to support effective recycling. The key actions that are foreseen in this proposal are focused on preventing packaging waste, increasing reuse, refilling, and making all packaging recyclable. The proposal in itself addresses three major constraints identified already in the impact assessments. The increase in the generation of packaging waste accentuated by new consumption habits. We've heard it here before that as much as we recycle, the consumption it's much higher, and so it's not enough. Then barriers to reuse and recycling, mainly due to the non-use of eco-design rules when conceiving the packaging, and low quality of secondary raw materials, mainly plastic materials, due to the need for greater investment in technology. The measures advocated in this proposal are expected to contribute to a more efficient use of raw materials and thereby to promote the competitiveness and resilience of enterprises, while also enabling citizens to reduce consumption costs, which sometimes is debatable, by preferring reusable over single-use packaging, which results in an extension on packaging lifetime. In a prevention and circular perspective, the proposal includes, besides some measures and targets, also ambitious requirements with a view to the elimination of over-packaging, improve recyclability, minimize the complexity of a packaging composition, increase incorporation of secondary raw materials, and phase out of hazardous substances to promote reuse, all this without compromising the food safety and quality of standards. We in Portugal, our collective system that is licensed for the management of packaging waste already includes some of the concerns addressed by the proposal, in particular by means of using eco-modulation of financial benefits that rewards or penalizes fillers or packers, depending on whether or not they implement business strategies to prevent the generation of packaging waste and facilitate recycling at the end of its life cycle. We've had a study on reuse carried out in 2022 by 3 Portuguese associations in the mineral water, beer, and non-alcoholic drinking sectors. It was supposed to be to study a self-regulation model for this, but as the Commission was coming up with this proposal, the model waited for the targets that are going to be set at the end of this negotiation. But for example, in the water subsector, the amount of reusable packaging placed on the market is relatively low, not to say very low, and is essentially limited to the hotels, restaurants, and catering sectors. Also in the juices and soft drinks, it's even lower. All reusable packaging is also distributed through these channels. And the beer and cider subsector has the highest supply of reusable packaging, with 45% in equivalent consumption units. The case of natural and spring waters is one of those that raises some concerns, and the reuse of packaging is quite a challenge, given that the natural and spring water filling units have to be located very close to the respective collection points, and it's not easy to do that, since transport in bulk of these waters is not allowed and jeopardizes its properties. And the same happens with some wines, especially those in recognized regions. So some of the targets in this proposal are a challenge and are not yet clear how we're going to do it, and we have some difficulty in assessing the scope for the water and wines covered, for example. Nevertheless, and more from the perspective of reuse, in the targets for 2030 and 2040 will certainly require investment from the companies. The implementation and operation of a packaging reuse system implies several changes in the facilities of the producers and the logistics and transport networks. Carrying out these changes is time-consuming, it's expensive, and although we are all committed to the targets, we also have to think of the impact it has on companies. The involvement of the sales channels. With increased circulation of reusable packaging, it will be necessary to allocate space at points of sale and distributors for storage and of used packaging. And space allocation is not always abundant, as we know. it's one of the main barriers to the rise of reusable packaging and has a cost in itself. At the end of the value chain, these costs will be passed on to the consumer, and it's essential to ensure that these investments are cost efficient and proportionate to the environmental contribution. And finally, to mention consumer involvement. Consumer participation is also one of the critical success factors for all these policies. The Commission is proposing to harmonize marking and labeling of packaging in line with what the containers for selective disposable, and we'll see how this works. We've had for the last years major campaigns to educate the consumer to separate everything, the glass from the paper, from the plastic, to put them in certain containers. It's yellow or it's blue or it's green. It depends on the member state. Yes, harmonize would be good, but it takes another extra effort to re-educate the consumer to do it. So these are some of the concerns we have. I hope it has been useful, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, you raise a number of topics there, which I'm sure are going to be part of the council discussions and no doubt in the Parliament as well. Maybe if it's okay, Mattia, I'll come back to you with some of those points and a couple of questions that we've had in the chat, and then I'll let yourself, Sirpa and Marta, address the questions together. But I mean, she raises some practical challenges that businesses and others face, and one of those in particular, I guess, is an investment challenge. How do we incentivize the investment by companies in this, and then the role of the consumer? So there are three broad areas, I guess, which would be interesting for you to react to, and maybe some specific questions, if you can bear these in mind. We've got a question of how the reuse and refill targets will work, particularly with an emphasis on effective reverse logistics. So that's one question we have. That's from a retail perspective, I think, in particular. Secondly, on chemical recycling, is it being considered as an option for hard to recycle plastics? And thirdly, a question essentially from the hotel, restaurant, catering perspective, the banning of single-use packaging and the targets associated. How are the difficulties associated with that for that sector being considered and mitigated? You don't have to answer all those questions, but if one or other of you can address them, that would be great. But first of all, Mattia, maybe reacting to what Marta said and maybe some of what Sirpa said first off, and then I'll come to Sirpa and Marta again.
Yeah, so indeed, Martin, so thank you very much both for the, summing up what Marta and Mrs. Pietikäinen said, and indeed also for the specific question, which are linked, by the way, to the points made by the Member of Parliament and also by the representative of Portugal. So as you said yourself, I would like to start with that. This is the beginning of, if I can put it like in a football game, it's the beginning of a match. In the sense that now you have 90 minutes to play, because the Commission proposal is only when the football match starts, and as you said, and then there is the co-decision process, which has already started, especially in the Council. There has been already a number of working parties meetings, and the Parliament has now just appointed the rapporteur, Mrs. Larissa, in the ENVI committee, which is also familiar with the both Mrs. Pietikäinen was indeed the rapporteur for the first package in 2018, back in 2018, so she's very familiar with our legislation. But also Mrs. Larissa, she's familiar because she was the rapporteur for the SUP directive, so she knows partially. SUP was much smaller compared in terms of single-use packaging compared to the overall packaging proposal we have now. But indeed, it's also good that a number of members of Parliament which are familiar with packaging are also now addressed, still there and engaging in this issue. And indeed, I will start with the first point, which is the logistics, which was raised by Mrs. Pietikäinen. It was raised now by you in summing up the question, Marta, and also understanding the chat. And the economic cost, as you said. Indeed, The Commission has assessed that. Our supporting studies have now been published on our impact assessment, which take over also the reuse part. And indeed, that's the reason why, for example, as you have seen on reuse, there is an exemption based on turnover, number of square meters, in order to at least exempt small and medium enterprises. I mean, we took inspiration by the German law. You may find a better exemption, and I think the co-decision process is there to see if maybe it needs to be improved. But indeed, we're fully aware that one thing is to implement a reuse system for McDonald's, just to give an example, or Starbucks. Another thing is to implement a reuse system for the corner shop down my road, where indeed it may imply the complete redesign of the shop. I mean, or for example, for a small restaurant. So that's, I think, the first point. So we have foreseen an exemption for small and medium enterprises. And then the second point, indeed, we have seen that the only way to reduce cost, and that is very important because there is a lot of focus also, Marta was focusing a lot on the targets, but if you look at our proposal, it's not only about the targets, so there is the targets for reuse, and there is also specifically for dining in and these things, there is even a ban of single use. But I think all of that, especially for the takeaway, for example, from the HoReCa sector, there we insisted a lot that this will also depend the success model and also the lowering of the cost on having in place what we call a reuse system. So, for example, the Commission has now foreseen the empowerment to come up and harmonize the standards and the formats of the products, because indeed you can imagine, and this links also to the question of Mrs. Pietikäinen and also of the chat about the life cycle assessment. Indeed, not only as Mrs. Pietikäinen makes sense to do a life cycle assessment, we're even obliged under the Waste Framework Directive to, in order to impose reuse, to do a life cycle assessment covering and to compare recycling with reuse. And indeed, if you have, imagine the beer bottles. If you have, like here in Belgium, many different formats, basically every single producer in Belgium has a different shape of bottle and a different color, of course, then the reverse logistic will be impossible, because then you will have to basically have a return back to each producer. So, of course, why Germany was a success model? Because in Germany you have mainly 3 formats of beers. And then, of course, what has happened is that I was visiting one beer producers in Germany. 2/3 of the beer that they were reused there, rewashed in order to be reused, were beers of the competitors. Simply just with different, you take out the label. So that is an important point. It is true that it may have, especially if you don't have harmonized formats, may have very high cost and not necessarily positive environmental impacts. But if you create the so-called framework condition, then we believe that there may be environmental benefits. Then indeed the question which on consumer, indeed that is essential, because indeed I was yesterday actually at a breakfast meeting organized by the US ambassador with I don't know how many members of parliament. So I understood how important is this proposal. And indeed there are now, as you know, in the French system from 1st of January 2023 is obligatory to have reuse in the HoReCa sector. It's a national law, and indeed it appears from what was shown yesterday that indeed there are interesting primary data. So with some of them they show high consumption of water, a shift from paper to plastics. So all these things, of course, are not in our impact assessment, because at that time we have used what we call secondary data. We didn't have primary data because this is only taking place now. Of course, now the Commission, and I understand there is a number of studies ongoing, is ready to look into that. But I also would like to stress that, as you have seen for the HoReCa sector in particular, the reuse target on the takeaway is rather a low one, because indeed we understand that I mean, you will need time to create that. Then there was a specific point on, and I will come at the end of your point also, Martin, consumer. I will touch first the last point on chemical recycling. Again, this we've been hearing a lot, that we should be more open and recognize upfront chemical recycling. I mean, my reply is that we cannot do it upfront because we need to set up first. So we need two steps. The first one is to set and to agree with the co-legislator on rules on recycled content. So as you know, we now have targets, as I explained, for 3 different categories: sensitive packaging, non-sensitive, and beverage bottles. Once there is the final proposal, the Commission will come up with an harmonized methodology on how you measure recycled content, for example, in a bottle. And once you know the harmonized methodology, then of course we will also in this harmonized methodology say how you can, what you can count in your whether you can count only mechanical recycling, also chemical recycling. Of course, I think it is clear, I mean, although it will have to be done at the later stage, that when mechanical recycling is leading back to another polymer that can be used, as Mrs. Pietikäinen was saying, again in a product or in packaging, of course that is a typical recycling operation. But as you know, the chemical recycling also results in fuel, in energy. So that's of course that part which is fuel cannot be counted because it's not, I mean, it's waste to energy. It's not a recycling operation. But all of that will have to be discussed in secondary legislation. But indeed, with this recycled content target, and especially for flexible packaging, because I didn't understand the question why was on hard packaging. Normally, chemical recycling will be even more needed for the type of plastics which currently cannot be dealt by mechanical recycling. So that's so it's a complementary tool. But also, the last point I want to make on chemical recycling, we have the latest GRC study, which clearly shows that when you compare mechanical recycling to chemical recycling, I think even the producers or the industry investing in chemical recycling will recognize that indeed in terms of CO2 emission, which was also the title linked to packaging of this I mean, proposal or this event, the webinar, indeed we should not forget that there is no difference, there is no comparison in the sense that mechanical recycling is really outperforming. I mean, it's really the best technology, but indeed it cannot work for all type of plastics. So indeed, you will have to look in a complementary way. And the last point on consumer, indeed, as you said, Martin, as also some of the speakers said, it is essential. That's the reason why we're thinking about the labels. Also want to reassure Marta, we're not thinking about, at least, we never thought about harmonizing colors. We know that there are different colors, but you can preserve still the different colors of the beans and the plastic bags, but you can still have a pictogram which is the same everywhere in Europe, which can then it will be easy for packaging companies placing their products in Europe because they will only have one pictogram to put wherever in Portugal or in Italy or in EU or in Ireland or in another country, and the same one in the bin or in the bags, independently of the color. So indeed, it is true that there was a certain point at political level even reference to the possibility to have an harmonized color system, but this is not our final proposal. The final proposal is about an harmonized pictogram systems, which are proved to be very effective, and I will conclude with that about educating consumers, because the Nordic countries, they have done it. It's called the Nordic pictogram. It started in Denmark, and then it was moved to Sweden, Finland, and Norway. And he has proved that they have increased enormously the collection rates. So they have the same pictograms in these 4 markets. They didn't change their system of the color schemes, but indeed by having the same pictograms, and it was work, even the design of the pictograms together with industry and all these things. And so that's, I think, is an important point that I wanted to make. And indeed, the same applies to the label for reuse, and the same applies to the label for recycled content. Of course, consumer, for us, the best way to educate consumer will be via this label. Of course, then we will also have to ensure that there are communication campaign. I think this proposal, in any case, needs to be accompanied at a certain stage by the communication campaign. But indeed, it's a proposal which is, I mean, I can tell you that out of the proposal of DG Environment, we looked at the numbers, and it was from the SUP directive that DG Environment did not have in our own website so many clicks on the web page of this proposal. I mean, I think 80,000, 90,000 people have downloaded within an hour or two from the publication in November the proposal. So it's clearly there is even citizens are interested in that. So I think indeed consumer education will play an important role.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Very sort of detailed and comprehensive answers, which means, to follow your football analogy just for this meeting, we're close to the end of the first half, but I'm going to allow some extra time just to ensure that we are able to hear from Sirpa and Marta again, because I think they may want to just react to some of what you've said as well as offer some opinions. So with your permission, we'll go on just for a little bit longer before we turn to the second half. First of all, to Sirpa, assuming you're still there. I can't see you, but hopefully you can hear us. And then to Marta. But a couple of minutes or so of reaction to that, Sirpa, if you'd like. If not, I'm going to pass straight to Marta, who definitely is still here. Marta, you kick off, and if Sirpa can hear us, she'll let us know, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think it all comes down to a question of balance between the commitment we all have with the final objective of reducing waste and being more sustainable, and Europe leading by example even to other parts of the world that need to make an effort like we are doing. It's a question of balance between these commitments, these targets, and the burden we impose on companies to change their strategies, to adapt to new packaging, to new logistics, to new spaces. And I'm glad to hear the Commission on the SMEs concern, because as you know, 99% of our companies are SMEs, and it's more difficult on them than on the big companies, naturally. And when we try to harmonize things, we have to think of the pros and cons of everything. You can harmonize the packaging, but then you cannot hamper the need for companies to innovate and to distinguish themselves, sometimes through packaging or the materials they use or colors or whatever. So I think it all comes down to this. We ourselves here in Portugal have to balance our position in the Council between the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Environment. And I think it's the same in every member state. We have our concerns, the companies have their concerns, and it all comes down to the costs that these changes impose on them. And also on consumer, here in Portugal, the Ministry of Economy also has a consumer policy. And I think that empowering consumers and information is essential for this change, because it's in our hands, all of us, when we make the choice. And sometimes we see studies that consumers are willing to pay more for a sustainable product. Not always true. So we try to educate consumers, make the smart choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. And I think, Sirpa, if you're unmuted, do you want to offer us some last thoughts on this before we pass to the next half?
Yes, very happily. I'm sorry about the previous, I forgot to unmute myself.
No problem.
I think that this is excellent discussion, firstly. Secondly, I understand very well the Martha's point on costs, but what I would like to underline on here is that we should have always in our impact assessment of legislation the cost of non-action. And we all know that if we do not act now, and especially the circular economy is so big part of it, then the costs are going to be via climate change and other factors, at least tenfold the COVID-19 costs roughly after 10 or 15 years from now. So this is just not a question whether we do it or not, but how to do it. Then just to notions, and this is indeed the product passport. That is a story of itself that I hope that maybe we could organize a separate session, because there are various ways how to organize it concretely, and the model that has been proposed by the Commission is pretty open, and what I'm afraid is that we might create systems that are not interoperable in the future, and so we might want to choose a bit tighter view on here. And last but not least, and this is the competitive side, and the Europe's ability to kick off the changes somewhere else, and this is the eco-design directive. We tried to make some improvements here in the Parliament. It is essential, it's vital that the packaging is part of it, like the whole circular economy principles, so that you cannot introduce, produce or import goods that are not upgradable, that are not repairable, that are not reusable, and that are not recyclable on the highest value of the material. And by that way, if Europe is demanding this in the global markets, we all know that the industries in China and USA will change to, they will not leave our markets because of these requirements. And that itself then speeds up the global change. So we are even in a much bigger role of importance than we tend to think in everyday politics. Thank you so much.
Very good, thank you. That's an excellent final point on the global dimension of this and trade related issues too. With that, I'm going to thank you, Sirpa and Mattia. I understand both of you need to leave now. I hope Marta can remain as indicated and maybe offer some perspective at the end of our next session. But thank you very much, Mattia and Sirpa, for your contributions. Wonderful as ever to see you and to have you involved in this. And we look forward to remaining in touch. I'm sure many of the participants, as well as ourselves, will be in contact with you frequently over coming months as this discussion continues. So thank you, and have a good rest of the day. We'll continue to be in touch with you, as I say. Good to see you again. So let's pass over. I'm going to keep using Mattia's analogy of the football match to the second half. Here we're going to hear from businesses who are at the sort of cutting edge of this in real life, in practice, and hear what their perspectives are before we also hear from a couple of NGOs who are also working on this issue. So with that, let me pass over first of all to Caterina, and then we'll pass to Ramon. Caterina, as you can see, works for Rockwool. I'm sure she will introduce Rockwool if you're not familiar, and Ramon for Ball Corporation. Likewise, he will no doubt introduce Ball too. So welcome to you both. Delighted to have you here as well, and really looking forward to hearing your perspectives on this too. So over to you first of all, Caterina.
Hi, so good morning everyone, and thanks for giving me the chance to join this very interesting exchange today. Yes, I'm here on behalf of Rockwool, which is the world leader in the production of stone wool product, insulation building, industrial, horticultural products, just to mention some. So, okay, let me start from giving you some data to put things in perspective. The built environment requires a vast amount of natural resources and accounts for about 50% of all the extracted raw materials. And the construction sector alone is responsible for over 36% of the EU total waste generation. And that is why the EU Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan originally rightly identified the importance of recovery targets for construction and demolition waste. In particular, the Commission made a commitment, and I'm quoting, pay special attention to insulation material which generates a growing waste stream. And this approach, of course, is even more important when we think about the ambitious renovation wave that we are aiming at, to avoid that this is going to become a waste wave instead. So, however, even if that was declared at the beginning, we are still waiting recovery target for construction sector the way they are meant to be introduced by the packaging and packaging waste regulation. So allow me to comment the circular economy package and the packaging and packaging waste regulation, drawing a parallel from a construction product perspective. So in Rockwool, we are or we have a strong drive on circularity. And this is naturally due to the fact that we are very durable. We have a durable product. We stay in use and performance don't change over time, even over 55 years. Our products are recyclable over and over again. And we even have our own take-back scheme called Rock Cycle, which is active in 19 countries at the moment. And moreover, we can also include other secondary raw material and byproduct from other industrial, through industrial symbiosis. And I'm talking about more than 650,000 tons per year. So the introduction, this introduction was not just to make a self-appraisal, but just to say that in principle we are happy and satisfied and ready to contribute to the circular agenda, but unfortunately the regulation that we need to help us doing that are not. So, and if I should just frame what are the issues that we are mainly facing, I would say that the first big one is that we are lacking common definition and common assessment. So in other words, we are lacking a level playing field and we are boosting greenwashing. Because when you are lacking assessment and definition, then you give the space to creativity. So for example, we are lacking a clear definition of recycled content. I mean, we have one coming from the ISO, obviously, the one we are probably all referred to, but that it's kind of controversial and subjected to different interpretation. Is byproduct in or out? For us, it should be in, because of course, byproduct is, for example, another way to reduce the use of virgin material, but that is still to be decided on a final, common agreed framework. Durability. We are lacking a definition of durability and assessment method. And I heard Mr. Pellegrini and very happily talking about reuse, and we are obviously on the same side, but how can you reuse, for example, a construction product if you cannot determine durability of that construction product? Is that safe towards consumer to tell them just reuse it without knowing whether the performance is still there? And then of course, we are also lacking a definition on what is a construction product that can be recycled and what is recyclability when we're talking about construction products. So with these regards, for example, the packaging and packaging waste regulation, introducing the recyclability definition is for sure a step forward, and even more than the packaging shall be considered recyclable if it can be recycled at scale, because it means that there is an intention to prove that this recyclability is going to happen in real life. We believe that the regulation could have been better in recognizing that not all the recycling process yield to the same quality raw material, or can be done, or to the fact that can be done over and over again. Closed loop recycling is key measure to guarantee that more packaging products placed on the market are made of recycled material in a continuous loop and keeping the same quality at the end of the day. While there is not also mentioning on downcycling in the packaging and packaging waste regulation, which we believe there should be somehow distinction. And then getting to my last point, I think that the scream that we are trying to do here, or to pass, or the message that we are trying to pass here, is that we need a more conducive regulation together with targets. Conducive regulation to enable harmonized extended producer responsibility, for example, like the one we have seen now in the proposal of the regulation, to facilitate the transport of waste when this waste is meant to be recycled. And maybe we should stop talking about waste if there is a resource, is in fact a secondary raw material. And targets, increase the cost of landfill, ban on landfill for recyclable products. We see that the cost of landfill in many countries is so extremely cheap that it's not incentivizing at all any kind of recycling practices. As I said, targets on minimal recycled content, material-based, otherwise there is going to be, let's say, distortion, because you cannot ask the same target to different products with different nature. So to conclude, conscious about the time, the packaging and packaging waste regulation introduced fundamental elements that are for sure bringing the circular discussion on the right direction. So we appreciate and also has packaging users, let's say, definition, mechanism, clear targets. But let me also say that we hope that the construction sector won't be left behind, or even worse, fall between the two chairs of the CPR and the waste regulation, because that is very much the risk, that we are not going to be regulated anywhere. And again, as I said, we account for an enormous amount of waste in the EU. Maybe green claims can start fixing the issue we have on greenwashing, which is getting bigger and bigger and leading to market unfair competition, and ultimately it's against consumer protection interest. So that's our pledge. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, that's great. Well, that raises both obviously the possibility, opportunity, and the need for more circular economic measures, but also very clearly some of the challenges and alignment issues between different pieces of legislation. I hope we'll come back to Marta, who may comment on that, but also our colleagues from the NGOs who will join us, and maybe they'll have a view as well. But conscious of time, I'm keen to pass straight to Ramon and to hear from you, and to keep the game in motion, so to speak, if I keep that football analogy alive. Ramon, the board is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ramon Arratia. I work for Ball Corporation. We are a producer of aluminum packaging, cans, cups, etc., and reusable bottles. And I'd just like to piggyback on what Caterina was saying, because it's really important. Like, it's about definitions and defining the elements in the full circle. From, we've focused a lot on collection, which is, of course, is what it starts, but you need to also start defining on sorting, and you need to find on how each of the parts and the design of the products, each of the parts can be dismantled, and that means about design of the product, but also around how the materials come back, in which quality they come back. So there are a lot of different ways of recycling, downcycling, and there are very little standards. So I like to piggyback on those. Now, I think the new EU PPWR, they have a lot of positive things, and it will definitely make Europe less dependent on primary resources, but also will be, contributing to the climate targets. And this is the two things that need to be tackled. Now, we see a few issues in the implementation approach, in the detail, which more or less could be relatively sorted. So, commenting on our sectors, on the deposit return systems, if we look at the positives, we're seeing, we're very excited to see a proposal that there is a mandatory DRS, and so happy to see our packaging, aluminum cans included. We've been advocating this for a long time, and only with regulation and harmonization you can achieve the 85 recycled content that is our target by 2030. This is not for one product, this is for the whole portfolio, the whole production, and you can imagine how much dependence on imports you would cut if you have that policy, and the same thing for climate. Now, we are very disappointed to see that single-use glass bottles were off the hook. Wine and spirits, the whole sector, pretty much on the hook. And glass has the worst carbon footprint of all beverage containers. So we don't see that we are really looking at the full LCA. And sometimes we forget climate when we talk about packaging legislation. So I think we need to go back to what Sirpa was talking about, the PEF, what Mattia was talking about, looking at the LCA and really understand, how, and making decisions based on the overall facts. So we think that instead for the EU, from a climate and waste prevention perspective, having a 90% separate collection for recycling target for all drinks packaging would be great. And we see harmonized rules for all 27 members around implementing a deposit return schemes. That would be really interesting. Now, obviously, we understand that sometimes there are voices and there are very powerful interests in some sectors. So we see that even setting a 90% collection goal for all beverage packaging, whether it is in DRS or EPR, I think that could be a sort of a minimum. In reuse, great news. I think you really need intervention to create the scale. But sometimes, it should focus on where it makes environmental and economic sense. The first thing is there is lack of environmental data. The reuse have been sort of the strategy have been set more on sort of hinges and gut feeling and read little evidence on where do we need to intervene, which sectors we need to intervene. We've just picked the sectors, hey, we are doing well on this, let's do so a bit more, rather than thinking about what are those sectors, especially those without the recycling path, because the reuse falls disproportionately on beverage, because beverage is already good at that. So we think that, and beverage is going to be already covered by DRS. We're going to achieve, for example, in aluminium, over 90% recycling collection targets, which will deliver 85%. And there are in other sectors as well, mostly on the food side, when reuse is frankly the only option. So we really think that we need to make decisions based on facts. Mattia mentioned Germany and the good case for reuse in beverage. Today in Germany there are more than 1,500 different bottles. 50% of the market share is on individual refillable bottles. So this idea of the pool bottle shared by different brands is not the full market, and that's why we need to look at the detail.
Very good, thank you. Well, I think a number of themes keep coming up here, notably measurement and how we actually talk about the same data and compare like with like over a life cycle. Maybe we'll come back to that. One question we've had, which I'll leave with you, maybe if we have time you can consider, even if it's not an EU lead responsibility, tax. Would taxing virgin raw materials help this in terms of an upstream incentive to keep the value of the materials in the cycle as long as possible? So we'll come back to that if we get a time at the end. But I am very keen to make sure we get Ioana and Larissa involved, and I hope that they are both online and can join us now, and that we'll be able to hear hopefully first from Ioana and then from Larissa. I won't do anything more than just welcome you and give you the floor immediately, since time is obviously running away with us. Really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining. Yeah, the floor is yours, Ioana.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. I will, in order to be complementary to, I think, what Larissa, my colleague Larissa Copello from Zero Waste Europe will cover, I will not dwell too much on the packaging waste regulation, but I will just summarize quickly that, in our opinion, it is a good first step. Yet it could have done better. And I wouldn't do my role of being an NGO very well if I didn't challenge the way in which things are developing. So we see a lot of creative energy and a lot of detail being developed on what concerns recycling, recyclability, recycled content. It all makes sense. In a circular economy, recycling is basically the norm. So it's good that we get these details right, and it's good that we get collection rates up. It's good that we foster product design that enables recyclability, and it's also important that we incorporate recycled content. Now, in the wider scheme of things, recycling makes sense and should be the norm if volumes remain stable. If the volumes of the materials that we put on the market continue growing, then even if we have 100% recycled content, we will still be overshooting what the planet can carry. And so in that respect, we think that, for example, in key legislation such as the packaging and packaging waste regulation, there could have been and should have been a bigger focus on waste reduction measures and reuse. There we see some effort with regards to tackling single-use packaging, particularly in certain sectors. It could have gone a step further. This because in the wider scheme of things, there is today too much material in circulation, and the EU consumes a very big amount of it. The material footprint of the EU in 2019 was of 18.9 tons per person per year. This is the second biggest rate after North America. And so material footprint essentially accounts for all resources used, from fossil resources to biomass to metal ores and non-metallic minerals that are consumed to meet the product and the product and consumption patterns of European citizens. This is well, the rate is huge and needs to be reversed. And so the circular economy in general is a tool to be considered to decouple resource use and raw material use from meeting human needs. And as a result, circularity, or in order to implement circularity, we need to keep this footprint that we have on the planet much more closer to how we are designing policies and what measures we are putting into place. And so I would also like to make the relationship between material productivity, which has ever since 2000, it has declined and has been stable ever since then. And this is particularly relevant with regards to sectors such as packaging. The fact that for most single-use packaging, the value of the material is lost to the economy after it is being thrown away, after roughly 20 minutes, is not a good trend. It's something that we need to think about much more, and it's something that we need to reverse using the circular economy agenda, but also getting companies to think about how to decouple resource use from meeting what consumers or citizens need. And so in that vein of thought, the idea being that sometimes it will require to dematerialize. Sometimes it will require to redefine ownership. Sometimes it will require to think about things in a larger and bigger perspective, and not just focus on individual production sectors. And so this is to kind of call also upon companies and industry to think about the market signals that they are giving. If the only value that is measured is economic growth or monetary value, then we are not actually helping to rethink the entire system and to ensure that our companies are fit for the future and for the circular economy. So what other measures of value can we create so that we are ensuring that instead of relying only on extraction and production, and then ensuring that consumption continues at the same rate, how are we ensuring that, for example, someone who would completely redefine ownership would still be considered a valued and valuable economic actor? So what can companies do in that respect? So I think overall, the message is that, yes, in terms of material footprint, we are not doing very well. We are in Europe, we represent 6% of the world population, but we're consuming 17%. That's something that Europe needs to be looking into. And for example, the ESPR, in our opinion, the eco-design regulation, should have as a main KPI the fact of driving down material consumption considerably. But this obviously is also something that should be extrapolated to many other sectors and to the economy wide to ensure that as we move along, we stop overshooting what the planet can carry. That would be my message today, and I will leave it to
Yeah,
Larissa?
well, I think it picks up on a theme we've had already, which is the importance of measurement, and in your case, mentioning the material footprint as a starting point for that, which remains a challenge. Obviously, that's a complex issue, but thank you. That was extremely helpful, and I'm going to pass straight to Larissa, give you the chance to offer your views as well.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much for the invitation. So just a short introduction about myself and the organization. So yeah, my name is Larissa. I'm a policy campaigner at Zero Waste Europe, and we are a Brussels-based NGO and network of organizations working across Europe on policy, EU policy, national policy, as well as local strategies to address wastes at source. Well, a general impression on the proposal. So it, as Ioana already mentioned as well, it has a good aim, a good direction. It's focused on the waste hierarchy, putting some waste reduction measures, establishing reuse targets, proposing some bans for some problematic and unnecessary packaging types, establish good criteria for deposit return schemes as well, for reuse. But of course, it would need more ambition if the EU is really serious in achieving objective of 100% reusable recycled packaging by 2030. And also the devil are in the details of the articles and the requirements in there. So I think first thing I would like to raise is actually one of the, I say, is the big elephant in the room that nobody mentions about packaging. It's about chemicals. So chemicals are really not addressed in the legislation. There are many studies that are showing that in Europe alone, over 8,000 chemicals can potentially be used in food packaging, and many of those linked to cancer and other serious diseases. Paper and plastic are the most used for food contact materials applications in Europe. So if you're really talking about packaging, we need to talk about sustainability and safety together. That needs to go in hand. We cannot talk about sustainability separate from safety of packaging. So this really needs to be addressed in the regulation and improved. Another point I'd like to address is about deposit return schemes and glass packaging. So I'd mention both here together, as also mentioned by Ramon. Single-use glass packaging is clearly off the hook from this proposal. So single-use glass packaging has been proven to have the greatest environmental impact compared to all single-use materials because it has a high energy consuming process. However, it also has the biggest potential for reusability. So reusable glass packaging, for instance, glass bottles can be used from 30 times on average if inserted in a reuse system. And also in terms of recyclability, if it's inserted in a deposit return scheme in a closed loop system, it can also be recycled almost indefinitely. So why single-use glass is out of deposit return schemes? Why spirits are not included in the reuse targets? So all of this makes a lot of questions regarding, single-use glass not being addressed, why it should be because of its high impact. When it comes to DRS, it's crucial that deposit return schemes, they are implemented to accommodate both single-use and reusable packaging. It's not in there in the criteria of the proposal, and it's not only important for the achieving both recycling and reuse targets, but also for the convenience of consumers. We already have technologies of reverse revending machines or for deposit return schemes where you can have both single-use and reusable bottles being returned in Germany and as well in other Scandinavian countries. Another point I'd like to make is regarding the definition of systems for reuse. So it's great that the proposal differentiates well what is a system for reuse, because it's actually sustainable packaging cannot exist without a sustainable system. So the reusable packaging needs to be inserted in a system. So it's great that the proposal refers to this system, but it's missing a crucial element that makes the systems efficient, which is the incentive to return the packaging. If there's no incentive to return the packaging, there's no return rates, and the systems cannot be run effectively and smoothly. I'm not sure if you have seen the example of some pilot systems being implemented in France, for instance, for McDonald's, etc., where with really poor return rates. It's because there's no incentive to return this packaging. Consumers are bringing it home because actually when they go to the fast food like McDonald's, they are used to take the packaging home anyway. So it's a new change of habits, and it needs to put this kind of new rules, which, for instance, incentive to return the packaging, like a deposit, for instance. That will ensure the systems it's well implemented and effective.
Just briefly now, I'm afraid, since we're running into extra time again, and
sorry.
I need to just give one person. I'm going to bring Marta back in at the very end just to give her a chance to reflect. But so just briefly, if you may.
Okay, I'll just finish on reuse as well, regarding the reuse targets being mixed with refill targets, and they should not be mixed. So the proposal defined refill and reuse separately because they are different mechanisms, and the targets cannot be achieved, cannot be mixed because there's one way you achieve refill and one way you achieve reuse, and there's different ways to calculate. Mixing both will lead to a huge margin of error and will lead to a not robust data for reuse targets. So since I don't have more time, I'll end up here. Thank you.
No, that's very good. You've covered a lot of ground in a short space of time. Thank you very much indeed. By all means, stay with us. We've got, I'm going to allow us a few minutes of overtime, so to speak. Marta, if you're there, I promise to offer you a chance just to reflect on what you have heard, and obviously how that relates to the discussions in the council in particular that you're engaged with. If you're still with us, you can join us now and give your reaction. I mean, it's obviously a wide-ranging discussion we've had, but we've gone from very broad issues like material footprint down to some very specific practical questions and concerns from companies, and as you've just heard from Ioana and Larissa in practice. So very briefly on your side, any other reflections before we bring this to a close?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Very interesting to hear these participants in the second panel. Going back to what Caterina said, and Larissa also, on greenwashing and deposit schemes, it brings us back to the consumer issue. On greenwashing, of course, if we have clear rules and definitions, it leaves less space for those bad practices, and we know imagination has no limits. So when you leave a breach, someone can invent something. We here in Portugal, we just initiated a campaign last week against the greenwashing to create awareness in the consumer. It's done in cooperation with the Consumer Association, and it's linked also to the EU Eco Label. And also on deposit schemes, we had a pilot project here in Portugal for bottles and metal containers. And it's really important to act on these issues, and sure this proposal will have an impact on both of them. And we will stand on our position in the council negotiations. Like I said before, it's always a question of a balance, because we are all committed to the same final goal that's clear to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's probably a very good way to conclude, actually. The range of points that have been raised, and obviously that need to be addressed, discussed further, and to conclude on, shouldn't, I guess, cloud the picture that actually there is a large amount of consensus on the strategic goal here. and some of the merits of that goal, namely, obviously addressing some of the shorter term needs that we have facing our economy and society in the context of many challenges right here, right now, but also the longer term environmental challenges. And the circular economy is one of these areas that combines these things together. If we get it right, obviously, and I think everyone is committed to the same goal here, it solves many of these problems at the same time. But that's complicated, and these issues obviously deserve the sort of discussion we're having today. And we're very pleased to have had obviously the range of policymakers, businesses, civil society voices that we have with us here today. I've found it extremely interesting myself. I hope everyone who's joined us has likewise found that interesting and useful. And I'm sure we will keep doing this. The task force itself is committed to doing that. Obviously, as CSL, we're going to enable that to continue to be the case. And we look forward to your feedback on any of the questions. If you've got more, please, as you can see here, Tamir is happy to answer those, and we'll get in touch with other speakers and participants where we can help. And obviously, we'll remain in contact with you all and look forward to another session like this. I apologize if it's overrun and that's caused you any issues with your future meetings, but like all good football matches, sometimes the best things happen in extra time anyway. So hopefully the last 7 minutes have also been good too. Yeah, with Marta, obviously you're involved in a football match now, as you know. So good luck, and maybe a score draw is a good way to finish though, rather than one winner and a loser. So anyway, enough football analogies. Thank you again to everybody, all our speakers, everyone who's joined online, all my colleagues who do all the hard work putting this together, of which there is an enormous amount, as you all know. And I wish you a good rest of day and look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.